Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. Donnell's Social 9 podcast. Today we are on Chapter 9, last chapter. How should governments in Canada respond to political and economic issues? If you're following along, I'm on page 298. This year in social studies, you have investigated how governance, and economics connect issues that concern Canadians, and to citizenship and identity. This chapter focuses on one group of issues that concerns Canadians, environmental issues, so that you can apply what you've learned. Thumb through today's newspaper for articles related to environmental issues. These newspaper, Google Alberta News, World News, just think of all the stuff that's going on with the environment today. Think about how much they affect your quality of life and how much you think they require government regulation and monitoring. This chapter explores how decisions about environmental issues affect the development of resources, jobs, and quality of life. You will investigate how governments and citizens respond to specific environmental issues that affect you and others. You can use the issues discussed in this chapter, such as climate change and biodiversity, as models of how to approach other environmental issues and political and economic issues in general. As you read the chapter, consider the different views and perspectives on the issues and to what extent you think governments and citizens should get involved. Think about your role in taking action on environmental issues. So in that chapter, you got biodiversity, which is the number and variety of plant and animal species on Earth, including genetic variation within individual species. Climate change, a rise in the average temperature of the Earth, primarily caused by emissions from burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. This is just from the textbook. On page 299, you got 3 pictures, which is right here. The top one, the person who operates this feller buncher relies on Alberta's natural resources for employment. Think critically. How do decisions about the environment affect resource development and jobs? Second one down. This person has made a choice to ride a bike rather than drive. Many factors could have influenced this choice, including fitness and environmental concerns. And the bottom one, Jimmy McDougall of Newfoundland and Labrador drives a Caterpillar 797 dump truck, the world's largest, to pick up a load of oil sand at Syncrude Canada's Aurora mine near Fort McMurray. Think critically. How could decisions about Alberta's oil sands affect the environment? How could they affect the quality of life of individuals and groups? Just something to think about. Think of how all the different aspects that get affected, when you start talking about the environment. I'm on page 302 right now. This whole chapter, I really want you to think about different perspectives, specifically when thinking about environmental issues. Environmental issues arise because of human activities that change the natural world. For example, changes happen when factories release toxins and other pollutants into the air or water, or when housing developments occupy land that once supported wild plants and animals. Like all issues, environmental issues involve different views and perspectives. The mind map, which you see on the screen right now, describes one way to break down the views and perspectives. A breakdown like this links to step 4, which you'll see later. So just take a look at this. You got workers, construction workers, oil rig workers, steel workers, companies, forestry companies, oil companies, mining companies, environmental organizations, so school environment clubs, community organizations, and provincial and national organizations such as the Alberta Wilderness Association and Pollution Probe. Consumers, because they create demand for product and services. Government, because of the values that shape political parties in power, and Aboriginal people, because their collective rights include rights to land and resources, and because their traditional ways connect to wild lands and wildlife. This is on page 304, following along. How are governance, economics, and environmental issues connected? The mind map on this page that you're looking at right now explores how governance and economics connect to environmental issues. Think about how an environmental issue that concerns you might engage different parts of this diagram. So just take a look at how everything connects, basically. At the top left there, you got laws affect the quality of our environment, including laws about water quality. This biologist is analyzing a water sample to test for pollution. Canada's federal political system creates and enforces the laws that govern Canada. Top right, economic decisions involve using resources in the natural world, such as forests, to produce goods and services, such as lumber. Economic decisions reflect values related to different economic systems, such as mixed economies or market economies. Bottom left, Aboriginal peoples have collective rights connected to the land. This photo shows Sophia, who has worked to protect the traditional lands of her First Nations in Manitoba. The rights of individuals and groups in Canada are set out in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Canada's Constitution that we learned about before. And the bottom right, consumerism makes consumers a powerful force in the economy. Consumer behavior affects demand for products such as gasoline and energy-efficient cars, which in turn impacts the natural world. On page 305 is a quick story of a grade 9 student in Edmonton. He says, "My biggest concern is pollution from big industries. I think companies take the easy way out when they put waste into rivers and the air. They should dispose of waste properly, including carbon emissions. I'm glad to see car companies taking action to put limits on carbon emissions, like putting hybrid cars on the market. Some companies are looking into hydrogen fuel cells too. It's important to solve environmental problems because they affect our lives, how we live, and how well we live. I think Canada's government needs to set higher standards to control air and water pollution, but Canada has a small population. The governments of countries with large populations like the US, China, India need to step up too." A girl in grade 9 story. "I worry about global warming and what will happen to the animals, wildlife because of it. Litter is also a problem. I see plastic bags and cans strewn around. Some people just don't respect what we have. I think government should help with environmental problems because it's going to take more than just the people who care about the environment to save it. It's going to take everybody. It's everybody's world. And we all need to show respect for the place we're in. Government can help make people take care of the world." One more story. Another girl in grade 9 from Calgary. "I'm concerned about how much we throw out and the way landfills are filling up. Some people throw away useful stuff that shouldn't go to the landfill. We should be recycling it and giving it away. I'm part of the Environmental Action Club at my school. We do a bulletin board about the environmental issues, and I do the paper recycling and container recycling for my entire school. I think every school should recycle, but I know that many don't. We have only one planet, and we're kind of destroying it. It would be good if government would put a limit on what people can throw away or how much they can throw away, like no more than 2 bags a week. In Ontario, they have that, by the way. And we need to do something about plastic. Everything is wrapped in plastic. They come in a box and they're wrapped in a cellophane. They don't need to be. I think the government might have a role there, putting limits on over-packaging." That's actually a good point. I'm now on page 308. What's climate change? Climate change refers to a rise in the average temperature of Earth due to a buildup of greenhouse gases, GHGs, in the atmosphere. An international panel of scientists, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, predicts that climate change will have extensive and mostly negative impacts around the globe. These impacts include rising sea levels, more severe weather, and the disruption of ecosystems and freshwater supplies. Greenhouse gases primarily come from burning fossil fuels such as natural gas, gasoline, coal, and oil. Most economies in the world rely on fossil fuels to produce resources such as metals and foods, and to manufacture and transport goods and services. Individual consumers also use fossil fuels, for example, to heat their homes and drive their cars. GHGs in the atmosphere affect the whole world. A region or country that emits more GHGs will not experience worse global warming. Different regions, however, will experience different impacts. For example, low-lying lands such as New Orleans and the country of Bangladesh face severe impacts from rising sea levels. A little did you know? Regions of North America are already experiencing impacts from climate change. For example, hurricanes on the east coast of North America have become more frequent and severe. In 2005, the city of New Orleans experienced extensive flooding because of Hurricane Katrina. Coastal cities such as New Orleans also face flooding from rising sea levels. Just looked at predicted temperature increases by 2099, if you wanted to just for fun to look at. right? You're looking at the, I'll leave that up there for a minute there just so you can see the impact or the predictions. Okay, so our area, Edmonton-ish area, we're looking at a, what did it say, 7 degrees increase. Here we got a, I was looking at CO2 emissions by province and territory. So pollution by provinces. We got Ontario and Alberta are the most by far. And I'll just leave that up for a sec so you can take a look. So Alberta produces, I'm almost on page 313 right now. Alberta produces 31.5% of the total emissions in Canada. More than Ontario, which is significantly bigger than Alberta. Alberta has a large GHG output because of its oil industry and its coal-fired plants for generating electricity. Ontario has a large GHG output because of its manufacturing sector, including steel mills and plants for processing metal ores. Political and economic decisions making help shape the industries and plants that Alberta and Ontario have. For example, laws and policies set standards for pollution control, including GHG emissions. Demand for energy and for products influences the number of industrial plants in operation. Reducing GHG emissions from industry is one way to respond to climate change. Just possible solutions. On page 314 now. It just says, page 312, 313, explore how GHG emissions differ regionally in Canada and in the United States. So Canada as a country produces 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The United States produces 20% of global, so all world greenhouse gases. Mexico, 1.5%. Those are the only three that it shows here. The U.S. has faced pressure from countries around the world to reduce its GHG emissions. How does the information from the map on page 314 explain this? Basically, in your opinion. In 2007, the U.S. had not agreed to join international negotiations or agreements concerning climate change, such as the Kyoto Protocol, which we're going to talk about in a second. International negotiations on climate change focus on reducing the GHG emissions of developed countries such as the US and Canada. Developing countries such as Mexico do not face the same GHG restrictions. This is because GHG restrictions can slow the economy of a country, which goes against the needs and interests of developing countries. It is also because developed countries have a higher GHG output than developing countries, so they can contribute more to climate change. The U.S. took a stand against international negotiations on climate change, partly because President George Bush did not believe human actions were causing climate change. President Bush also believed that international agreements on climate change should not exempt developing countries from taking action. In 2008, in the State of the Union address, President George Bush said the U.S. would take action on its own to reduce its GHG emissions without entering into international agreements. He also said on climate change had to respect the American belief in the power of individuals and the ability of free people to make wise decisions. So what exactly is the Kyoto Protocol? Climate change involves the whole world. So it involves countries of the world in negotiations about how to take action. Canada and the U.S. are part of these negotiations. The Kyoto Protocol was the first climate change plan the countries of the world negotiated. The U.S. did not agree with the plan. Canada at first agreed, but its position has changed depending on the political party in power. Canada's Liberal government ratified the Kyoto Protocol in 2002. It, however, did not make decisions that reduced Canada's overall GHG emissions. So in 2002, Canada's Liberal government said, yep, we agree with the protocol, but it didn't do anything about it. In 2006, Canadians elected a Conservative government, which announced that Canada would not meet its targets under the Kyoto Protocol. The government said that the targets would damage Canada's economy and noted that Canada's GHG emissions were rising, not falling. In 2007, an international meeting in Bali, Indonesia, launched new international negotiations on an agreement to fight climate change. After 2012, when the Kyoto Protocol expires, Canada and the U.S. agreed to take part in these negotiations. So on this page, just some ideas for GHG reduction, so greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So you got public transit, such as Calgary's LRT, can reduce GHG emissions by reducing the number of people who drive to work and school. The federal government encouraged consumers to use public transit by reducing taxes for those who bought transit passes. The bottom left, you got the federal government provides funds to develop renewable energy technologies such as wind turbines and solar panels. This is the McBride Lake Wind Farm near Fort Macleod. Alberta is one of the largest wind farms in Canada. Top right, this machine is harvesting corn, which can be turned into biofuel. Biofuel emits fewer GHGs. In 2007, the federal government began to fund the production of biofuel. And the bottom right, the power plant outside of Edmonton uses coal to produce electricity. The Conservative government passed the Clean Air Act in 2006, which set new GHG emission standards for most plants and industries in Canada. Little cartoon, so it's talking about like how your individual choices have impact. I'm on page 318, which also has a cartoon here. It says, are you a teenage GHG emitter? So it says, this is on page 318, by the way. Here's a typical morning for Shane. His routine involves choices connected to energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. How much is his routine like your routine? Who should be in charge of the choices that affect GHG emissions? So the guy goes, breakfast. He's got some bread. What foods do you like? He's got some bread and he's putting some jam on the bread. What foods do you like? What if the government began promoting biofuels made from grain, vegetable oil, and sugar as green alternative to fossil fuel? How might this affect the food supply? How might this affect you? So if the government started significantly increasing production of biofuels, what chain reaction could that have with regard to food supply and cost of food? Then he's having a shower and listening to some music, because who doesn't sing in the shower? How much hot water do you use? Home furnaces and water heaters account for about 6% of Canada's GHG emissions. What if the government passed regulations about appliances and shower heads that restricted the amount of hot water available to you? And now he's in a car driving to school. And it says, don't forget about your guitar lesson after school. I'll pick you up at 3:30. How much do you drive in a week? Private vehicles emit about 12% of Canada's GHG emissions. What if the government put a tax on gasoline to discourage driving by making it more expensive? I think it's already expensive enough. Just some things to think about. Page 320, plugging into solar. So it's a story about Rob Grant, grade 12 student. Rob Grant put solar panels on his school. The project started with me and one other student, Elizabeth Solverson. We felt it was important to make people aware of renewable energy. We wanted to get as many people involved as possible, so we announced a meeting. Anyone interested could attend. 25 people are part of the group now, and we meet every week. The solar panels create electricity and supply about 3% of what the school needs to run its lights, computers, microwaves, and so on. The panels went up in December 2007 and cost about $25,000. We're in a perfect position in the school to educate people and demonstrate environmental stewardship. People read about renewable energy. We want them to see it in action. We wanted to get renewable energy out of the textbooks and into real life. Interesting. Very, very cool. Page 323. What impacts do economic and political decisions about the oil sands have on climate change and quality of life? Oil sands development in Alberta emits large quantities of GHGs. So economic and political decisions about climate change often affect the oil sands, and decisions about the oil sands affect climate change. These decisions involve many views and perspectives, including those of producers, consumers, and governments. They involve legislation and the rights of Aboriginal peoples and of individuals. They affect quality of life in many ways because of jobs, the impacts of climate change, and other factors. There's some articles that I will read that explore some of the views and perspectives connected to decisions about oil sand development. And just some articles, completely free everyone to have their own views and opinions on this, especially when it comes to job creation. So this is in 2007. Federal government lets Alberta oil sands off the hook. It's on page 323, by the way, the article. The federal government today, this is in 2007, issued clean air regulations that exempt Alberta oil sands from new pollution limits. Under the regulations, oil sands plants will not need to cut back on smog-forming emissions such as volatile organic compounds and nitrous oxide. In addition, oil sand plants will not have to cut greenhouse gas emissions for 3 years, a move the government hopes will result in a rapid expansion of oil sand development. Next article. Premier rejects call to slow oil sands. Again, 2007. This is when the oil sands were doing really well. So again, positive being lots of jobs. Calgary. In a speech to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, Alberta's Premier Ed Stelmach said continued growth of the oil industries was key to Alberta's economic future. He noted that in 2006, 1 in every 4 new jobs in Canada was created in Alberta, and that unemployment was the lowest in any Canadian province in the last 30 years. The Premier acknowledged that the rapid growth of the oil sands had put pressure on Alberta's infrastructure and public services, but he rejected the idea of slowing oil sand development. He said that some people have suggested his government touch the brakes on oil sand development. He stated that his government rejects that idea because it believes producers and consumers acting freely make the best economic decisions. He said government should not be involved in manipulating the economy. Page 325. Coalition urges slowdown on oil sands. A coalition of groups in Alberta called on the provincial government today to stop approving any more oil sands projects. The group represents a variety of interests: First Nation communities, environmental organizations, scientists, healthcare sector employees, labor faith communities, and social justice groups. All of them feel the rapid pace of oil sand development has put too much strain on the quality of air, land, health, and the economy in Alberta's communities. They are running ads in newspapers, Medicine Hat and Grand Prairie. It's time to stop and think. Just different views and perspectives, right, guys? Different views and perspectives. I'm now on page 329. Biodiversity refers to the variety and number of living things on Earth, and to the ecosystems living things both shape and depend on. Ecosystems provide us with many ecological services, such as clean water, clean air, and climate control. So they connect to the quality of life of everyone. Ecosystems can also have cultural and spiritual importance to people. In addition, ecosystems can be an important source of wild food for some Canadians, especially for some First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. I'm on page 330, which is talking about a eco-warrior. It says, look into what environmentalist has learned about taking action. As you read, think about how his ideas could help you build a plan of action. Just perspectives. So this is the story of a biologist. The issue, woodland caribou. Woodland caribou do not tolerate human activity well, partly because they eat lichens. Lichens thrive in old-growth forests established and undisturbed for at least 80 years. Woodland caribou used to range all over Alberta's boreal forest, but logging operations and oil and gas development have disturbed large areas of their habitat. Disturbed forest doesn't grow lichens, and it attracts deer and moose and wolves. Wolves find caribou an easy meal. The woodland caribou is now listed as a threatened species under the Federal Species at Risk Act. So just some examples here. Limited Brands is a clothing company that uses catalogs to market its products. In 2006, it agreed to convert its catalog to paper certified by the FSC, a move that helps protect woodland caribou habitat. Other companies that use FSC certified products include IKEA and Home Depot. Number 2, laws. One of the challenges is how to get oil and gas companies on board. Laws are an important lever for them. So far, governments haven't done much to protect caribou habitat, but the federal government has an obligation to protect the woodland caribou under the Species at Risk Act. So we've launched a case to trigger action from the federal government. We hope this will have an impact on the oil and gas development. International agreements. The nations have signed this agreement. Conscious of the importance of biological diversity for evolution and for maintaining life-sustaining systems of the biosphere, affirming that the conservative and biological diversity is a common concern of humankind, and aware that conservative and sustainable use of biological diversity is of critical importance for meeting the food, health, and other needs of the growing world population. So it's kind of like different steps, right? Step number 1 is trying to convince companies, local companies, of the importance. Step 2 is going to the actual country's federal government to create laws that protect the environment and animals. And step 3 is international agreements between countries all over the world. Okay? So this chapter is all about, environmental issues, but not just about, we got to save the environment. It's the chain reaction that they cause of how can we protect the environment, have standards in place, but also make sure the economy is growing and people have jobs. That's it for chapter 9, guys. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Have a great summer.